No matter how safe you think you are, evil doesn't need an invitation to come through your door. Carla McPhee is a single mom, trying to make a better life for her and her daughter, Caitlin. But one Sunday afternoon, Carla's mother returns with Caitlin after babysitting her for the weekend. They have climbed these steps 100 times, running to Carla's welcoming arms. They have no idea what horror waits for them inside. In true crime, investigation and conviction may take years. But every detective knows that the crucial clue is always there, somewhere in the first 72 hours. Toronto, 1994. Detective Doug Grady of the Toronto Homicide Squad responds to the discovery of Carla McPhee's body. Grady sees immediately that Carla's been sexually assaulted.
Her posterior was up in the air slightly, and her head was almost decapitated with several cuts across the throat with a very, very sharp instrument.
Grady notices something unusual about the pattern of blood around Carla's body.
The pooling of blood was straight underneath her throat. There was not cast-off blood in directions around the apartment. There wasn't anything on the walls that you'd normally get when somebody who's got a frenzy with a knife. So it looked like she was probably pushed down from behind, and somebody who was very strong or in real control of the victim did this offense.
This can only mean one of two things.
Either the victim in this case knew the attacker, because nothing was ransacked, nothing seemed to be unusual in the apartment, or she was totally surprised by the attacker.
The coroner arrives to examine Carla's body. He discovers that she has been anally raped and collects a semen sample for DNA analysis. Grady needs to have a quiet word with Carla's mother. How could she have made herself vulnerable to such a violent attack? Where was she? What was she doing? Who was she with in the few hours before her death?
We interviewed the mother. The mother had picked up the child early Friday to have her for the weekend so that the victim in this matter could have a weekend by herself.
Carla's mother, Dora, describes her as a loving and devoted mom. She worked and studied hard, dreaming of the day when her certificate as a legal secretary would allow her to build a better life for herself and Caitlin. She says until 4 years ago, Carla was happy, planning her upcoming marriage. But her life was torn apart when her fiancé suddenly died. Unable to cope with the devastating loss, Carla plunged into a spiral of depression that led to a dependency on painkillers and finally alcohol. Most of the time, Carla could keep her demons at bay. But when she felt the pressures building to a breaking point, she'd send Caitlin to stay with her grandmother, just for the weekend, so her daughter wouldn't see her out of control. And this had been one of those weekends. As Grady replaces the photo of Carla's dead fiancé, he makes a discovery.
On the mirror in the bedroom, there was a note, and it was a note from somebody who was quite upset.
Carla, I left at 1:30 a.m. What happened? Did the beer delivery man have a cure-all drug for you to make you well? Going out with him and leaving me here is a total insult upon me. Think about what you did and how rude your actions were. Call me when the milkman leaves. The handwritten note is signed by someone named Frankie. Who is he? Dora is instantly hostile. Frankie is Carla's current boyfriend who lives nearby. Carla was trying to break free of him. Frankie is brought down to the police station for questioning. He hobbles in on the crutches he needs for his bad hip. Grady wants to know about the note, its jealous tone. Who is the beer delivery man, this milkman, who made Frankie so upset? But Frankie is distracted and often incoherent.
This particular person had his own physical problems. He had his own dependencies. He had some drug abuse himself, and he was a recovering addict.
What does come out is that Frankie went to see Carla on Friday night. According to him, she had already started her weekend binge. She was drunk and out of control. She was furious that Frankie had not brought any beer with him, so she called her local beer delivery man, the milkman in Frankie's note. Carla sent him off to put the beer in the fridge. She must have left with the guy, Frankie tells Grady. All he knows is that when he came out of the kitchen, she was gone. He was so angry that he took her keys and went home, leaving her locked out of the apartment.
115, 125, 123.
About 2:30 Saturday morning, at home in his own bed, he got a call from Carla. She was screaming at him for locking her out. He didn't want to listen to any more abuse. He hung up on her. There's only one person who can back Frankie's story. It doesn't take Grady long to find the man who makes his living as a late-night booze courier. The delivery man admits he brought beer to Carla's apartment that night. He'd done it often before. Sure, Frankie was there. But as soon as he was out of the way, Carla started flirting. She asked him to take her out for a drink.
She was an attractive young woman, so he decided that when she asked him to take her to a local bar, that he thought, fine, he would do that.
But Carla didn't show him the good time he was looking for.
And then she just left him basically at the bar as he walked in.
Grady now has two suspects, two men made to look like fools. But was this enough to make either one of them commit such a horrendous rape and murder? Or was Carla's murderer lurking in the bar that night, waiting to buy her one last drink? Detective Grady needs to trace Carla's movements the night she was murdered. He canvasses her building. Did anyone see her with Frankie? Who helped her make the phone call? Grady has success with two young women who live in a basement apartment. They did see Carla late that night, and they do have a story to tell.
When the victim came back, she couldn't get into her apartment, so she was banging on doors to be let in. Finally, she knocks on the door of a couple of students. She had to call her ex, and she used this phone of the students. Well, they heard from her yelling and screaming and demeaning this person. She's very upset, very irate, because she always left the apartment unlocked.
The students wanted to get rid of Carla before she woke the whole building. So one of the girls went to get the super to let her into her apartment. They watched her go in, and that was the last time they saw her. Since he had a key to her apartment, the super is next on Grady's list. But he tells the same story as the students. He let her in and went back to bed. End of story. After speaking to the students and the super, Grady is now convinced that Frankie is his prime suspect.
He had motive, he had the opportunity. The one thing we didn't know about him of whether he had the means and the strength.
Could a man on crutches overpower Carla? Grady brings Frankie back to the station to fill out a questionnaire asking him, where were you that night? How did you know the victim? What more can you tell us?
One of the questions is, did you kill this victim? He responded to that by writing, I don't know. That was the second day of our investigation. If I ask somebody, did you do a crime? I expect the answer to be no, I did not, or to be upset that I'm asking the question.
Grady immediately digs deeper into Frankie and Carla's past. He finds police reports of abuse on both sides.
Get out!
So this was truly a volatile relationship that was ongoing and had been going on for about 4 or 5 years.
Grady grills Frankie about his answer, I don't know, to the questionnaire. After several hours, it's clear Frankie has no answer. Under pressure to prove his innocence, Frankie agrees to give a blood sample to compare his DNA with the attacker's semen recovered from Carla's body. The results are a stunning surprise. DNA returns show that the semen in Carla's body did not come from Frankie. But even though Frankie's DNA isn't a match, Grady is sure Frankie is somehow involved in Carla's murder. Why else would he answer, I don't know? Frankie's alibi is checked by other means. Grady subjects him to a polygraph test. Finally, persistence pays off. The polygraph reveals Frankie is lying. But about what exactly?
Well, when his DNA doesn't match and he fails a polygraph, that may mean that we have taken the wrong direction. Maybe he's not the person that committed this homicide. Perhaps it's a friend of his. Perhaps there's something he's trying to hide.
Grady puts Frankie under surveillance.
For me as an investigator, I want to find out who did this, who's responsible, because I'm also concerned that it was such a violent homicide. I'm concerned that this is not going to be the last one for this particular perpetrator.
With no solid evidence to connect Frankie to the murder, Grady casts his net wider, looking for other links to the killing. He collects DNA samples from people that he knows had contact with Carla, the building superintendent, the beer delivery man, men from the bar, and Frankie's drug dealer. But no one is a match for the rapist's DNA.
It becomes more and more frustrating that we're not speaking to anybody who's been the donor of the DNA deposit in the victim.
After 6 months, the investigation grinds to a halt. There are no new leads, no new suspects, and there has been no DNA hit. Carla's killer is still at large. The case goes cold for 3 years, when suddenly, out of nowhere, comes a break that Grady could never have imagined. Finally, Detective Doug Grady gets a break in a case that has haunted him for 3 years. In a seemingly unrelated crime, a sexual predator has brutally raped 2 little girls. Fortunately, there was a witness, and the rapist was caught. His semen is submitted for analysis to the Center of Forensic Sciences. His DNA is a match for a sample taken from an earlier crime. Scientists call such an unexpected match a cold hit. Pamela Newell analyzed the results.
The results came back to me, and I'm told that there is a hit to spermatozoa from the rectal swab of a young mother who's been raped and murdered in Toronto some years prior to this.
That young mother was Karla McPhee.
The degree of certainty in that particular case is that you would not expect to see it again in 6 billion people, in the entire population of the world.
To Detective Grady, Pamela Newell's cold hit means that Karla's murderer and the child rapist have to be the same person, Anthony Melbourne Lee.
And that's the frustrating part in the case, to know that there may have been a way, I don't know what the way is, but there may have been something there that should have caused us to get towards Melbourne Lee before he was able to victimize other people.
With Lee as his new prime suspect, Grady can finally let go of his suspicions about Frankie. He now understands Frankie's answer to the question, "Did you kill Karla? I don't know."
I now believe the reason he said that is because he truly didn't know what happened and if he was the one responsible. I believe that he was intoxicated quite often during this period of time, and that he was so upset with her, he didn't know if he actually did it or not.
Grady starts to build the case against Anthony Melbourne Lee, a career criminal with a long history of violent crimes against women and children. He is diagnosed as a sadistic rapist as well as a psychopath. He scores 39 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, making him one of the most dangerous people in the country.
We start looking at our suspect now and seeing where we can intertwine him with the victim.
Grady looks into the files on Anthony Lee and discovers that 3 years ago, Lee had a temporary address in Toronto. That address is another apartment in Karla McPhee's building.
With that knowledge, I went and interviewed him at the facility that he was in custody on these original charges of sexually assaulting 2 young girls. And during that interview, he could have cared less about anything.
Lee doesn't try to hide the fact that he was staying with a friend in Karla's building about that time. He often stayed there. Grady digs deeper. How does Lee explain that his semen was found in Karla's body? Lee has a quick answer for that. He remembers Karla quite well. He'd been out front having a smoke when she came staggering home, drunk out of her mind. She liked his smile and invited him up for a drink. Lee was discreet. He says he watched the whole scene go down with Karla being locked out. He waited until the coast was clear before grabbing some drinks and heading upstairs where Karla was waiting.
Hey, baby, you there?
Lee remembers that after a few drinks, Karla got kinky. She wanted to have anal sex on the love seat. Everything was going great when her boyfriend suddenly showed up. But Lee was cool. He'd been in this situation before and knew better than to ever take his pants off. He jumped up, pulled out the pistol he kept tucked under his waistband, grabbed the drinks, and split while Frankie went crazy in the apartment. Lee took off for Detroit and never looked back. But Karla was alive when he left her. Grady has to consider the possibility that Lee is telling the truth.
As much as it was our opinion that the person that did this sexual assault is the suspect, you had to prove it to a jury way beyond just the DNA being there and therefore it's him. We had to show that he had the motive, the deviancy to do this. He had the opportunity. He was there, able to do it.
To help him establish the case against Lee, Grady turns to prosecutor Rita Zayed. Together, the two dismantle Lee's story point by point.
Mr. Lee gave a story, but the crime scene photographs really contradicted him.
Grady and Zayed examine the photographs. They clearly show the cushions neat and undisturbed. No one had sex on the love seat. Grady and Zayed consider how ridiculous Lee's claim is that when confronted by Frankie and holding him at gunpoint, he would bother to stop for the drinks. they analyze and reanalyze Lee's story. They focus on the biggest hole of all and demolish Lee's story with the simple observation that Lee never mentioned, but surely would have seen had Frankie really confronted him that night. The man was on crutches. In court, Grady and Zayed present their theory of what really must have happened to Carla that night.
The victim came into her apartment, did not lock the door. She goes to that armchair. She puts on her favorite movie. She's sitting there with her drink, having a cigarette. The suspect, Mr. Lee, walks in, puts a knife to her throat because there is no sign of struggle, forces her on the floor. She is anally raped, and of course, she's almost decapitated. He knew it was wrong to rape women and children. He knew it was wrong to kill someone, but he didn't care. He didn't care.
I very rarely think of a homicide case where there's redeeming things in it, where, thank God, something happened. Perhaps the only thing in this case is finally Melbourne Lee is off the streets, and that he's not going to be able to do this to somebody else.
The court found Anthony Melbourne Lee guilty of first-degree murder and declared him a dangerous offender. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The stories on 72 Hours are true. The detectives and forensic scientists are the ones who actually worked on the case. The names of the victims are fictitious. The names of the convicted are real.